and get started and cover some of the housekeeping slides as people are logging in, getting settled in. So that way we'll have plenty of time for our main event today. And welcome everyone to part 2 of fundraising planning. We have some wonderful guest presenters who are back with us, Krista Ortega and Laura Berhman. So, great. Before we begin, I'll quickly go through the agenda and then some housekeeping items, and then I'll turn over the stage to Krista and Laura. So first, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So housekeeping, and then our presentation, and we'll have time for a good Q&A session at the end, and then a few announcements from the Strategic Philanthropy team. And that should bring us to the end of the hour and a half. Please keep your microphones muted if you're not talking. Feel free to post any questions you have in the chat box, and we'll try to monitor that and get back to your questions as quickly as possible. A recording of the webinar and presentation will be emailed out within a few days after the webinar is completed. And then a recording of the webinar and presentation will also be posted on the resources page of our sanmanuelcares.org website. So you can look for it in your email, and then also you can find it later online. All right, and without further ado, I'll turn it over to our main event here. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. So nice to be here again. With all of you. I'm just going to share my screen real quick and get started. Sorry, my internet's a little slow this morning. There we go. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. We're so excited to be back with you today for our second part of fundraising planning. Yay. I'm sure you remember us, Laura and Krista. Heidi already introduced us. Krista is our programs manager in the West, and I'm her programs assistant based in Oakland. Krista's based in San Diego, so nearer to you. So we're going to do a quick warm-up. It's been a week, so I think it's good to get grounded for a minute before we get started, just given what's going on around us. So I would love it if you would go ahead and write in the chat, given everything that's going on in the world right now, what is giving you strength or hope? And strength and or hope. And you can put in as many things as you want in the chat. We love to hear them all. I think we could all use a little bit of strength and hope right now. So go ahead and put that in the chat if you like. What is giving you strength and hope?
We've got some coming in, Laura. You'll appreciate. One person said, my pup. Oh, I think that's Heidi. Thanks for sharing, Heidi. Laura's got really cute doggies too.
Yes.
Amanda shares, our class of 2021 foster youth high school graduates are so amazing, smart, and resilient, and gives me hope for the future. That's beautiful. That's one of the benefits of doing the work, huh?
That's why we're all here, right?
You want me to keep reading, or are you able to see them too, Laura?
No, go ahead and keep reading.
Okay. Anne shares, the kindness of people sunsets my job. We can relate. Summer is coming. Yes. We got some yeses for that. Summer is on its way. My faith in eventual change for the better. Thank you for sharing that, Jay Epps. We all need to be reminded of that. Change can take time. Another yes to summer. We started our youth soccer league, and it was wonderful to see the girls out there playing and enjoying being outside. It's the simple pleasures these days. I'm completely with you. I have a soccer field just a few blocks away and started to see kids playing outside recently too. Science. Thanks for adding that one in, Heidi.
Science. Nice.
Keep adding. Marilyn said, my faith in the Lord, friends, and family. Thank you for sharing, Marilyn.
Nice. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Those are great. Yeah, I was just at my first baseball game of the season for my son last night. They did not win, but we were so happy to be out there watching baseball. It really did not matter to anyone. And he played well, so that was good. Great. All right. Well, that's great. Thank you so much. Very inspirational. And we'll move on. Let's see. There we go. So about last week's session, I just want to know the session and also your homework. If you had any burning questions that you wanted to ask us, or anything that sort of gnawing away at you when you went back to work, or something that made an impression on you, some insight that you had, something that you maybe actually used when you went back to work, we would love to hear that. So go ahead and put those in chat. Do you have any burning questions, or do you have any insights about what you learned last week and while you were doing the homework? I'll give you a minute.
While folks are thinking, I thought I'd read the other hope and statements that came in. Someone said, our amazing scholarship recipients that continue thriving despite any challenges. It must be very strengthening and grounding to continue to see in the work. My garden, someone added as well. So keep the hope coming, but also, yeah, we want to know your insights from last week. Like Laura said, burning questions that you have about the topic before we dive in and hit you with a bunch of new stuff. And if you don't have them now, we'll build in plenty of time as we go, right, Laura?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can move on. I just thought it would be nice if there was something really gnawing at you, I wanted to get that out of the way before we continued. But we can go ahead and move on. So here are, again, our learning goals for you. After last week's training and today's, our goal is that you are able to explain the basic steps for developing a fundraising plan, that you're able to identify your organization's assets, develop a case statement, set your fundraising goals, and then draft your fundraising plan. Or if you have a fundraising plan, then revisit your plan and hopefully make it even better. So let's go back to the 6 steps for a sec. Last week we talked about identifying your assets, developing a case statement, and setting your goals. I'm going to spend a few minutes reviewing these just because it was a lot of information before we get into the plan itself. And really we just want to reinforce what you learned and kind of lay the foundation for today's session on creating a plan. So number 1, identify your assets. Asking yourself, what are my current organizational strengths? What makes my organization appealing to potential funders? So when you think about your organizational strengths, what comes to mind? Last week we talked about strengths and you all wrote different things in the chat. Some of them were a strong mission. Let's see, it was dedicated staff, I recall, engaged community. You also said, I think one person said a great facility. That's wonderful. And then some other examples are a large public base of support, name recognition, that's a big one, well-connected staff and board, and also a high traffic website, or frankly, a high traffic location even. We also talked about a SWOT analysis, which is a good way to access your strengths and weaknesses. Some of you had done one before, but I know some of you had not. So we all tried our hand at starting the SWOT analysis. We listed our strengths in the chat. So I thought I would do a quick exercise based on this, which is let's try listing our weaknesses in the chat. So we've already done strengths. Now put in your weaknesses if you can. So put in anything and as many as you like, what you think your weakness is as an organization. We'll just spend a few minutes on that. I'd love to hear what's coming in.
Nothing quite yet, but folks are thinking and warming up.
Yes. And it can be a big, something that you think is a very big weakness, or it could just be something minor, like we're currently finding it hard to hire someone for marketing or for development, or it can be anything that is sort of a challenge to you right now.
We've got a few. We've got limited number of staff.
There you go.
I feel like many of us can relate. It's a weakness, but also something that many of us have. You're not alone. Variances in funding. Great, thank you for sharing. Lack of giving from our social media audience. Okay, interesting. We could dive into that a little more later if we have time. Website that needs some work.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Limited number of staff, strong individual donor campaign, but no CRM in place, which, that's with limited number of staff, it's hard to put that in place. Monitoring quality of services while working remotely.
Yeah.
Awareness and education is what leads to advocacy. Need to educate before we can get support.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing all of these. We've got a few more. Lack of strong base of individual giving. Too many things going on at once. Need to reduce distractions, diversions, and staff not always working together because of part-time hours.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Especially now. Yeah, those are great. So one thing that you'll notice through this is that, and Krista sort of alluded to this, but whenever you see a weakness in some ways, that's also where you look for opportunities. So, hiring staff obviously is a weakness, or that you can't find staff, but once you do, you'll be able to pick the right staff, hopefully, that's a fit for your organization that can now, make your organization stronger and better. So that is an opportunity. You have the opportunity to find the most amazing person, because right now you don't have that person. So, weaknesses and opportunities are sort of, it's like a two-sided coin, I would say. So that's what I wanted you to think about, is what weaknesses are you turning into opportunities, especially within fundraising. Okay, and then number 2 is developing a case statement. Your organization's written document, basically we talked about that for small to mid-size organizations. It should be about 5 to 10 pages, and it should include mission and values, your programs and services, your accomplishments, and your plans for the future. What are your goals? And then budget needs. So preparing your case statement, it's an opportunity to collect data and demonstrate your strengths and your competencies and the effectiveness of what you do. And ultimately, it can be used as a core communication tool for your staff, for your board. It basically just gets everyone on the same page. It can be used for writing proposals, speeches, press releases, etc. Great document to have. And then number 3 was set your goals. So before you can articulate where you want to go, you have to know where you are now. So when you're thinking about your current fundraising strategies, ask yourself, who are your current funding partners? Making sure you know where your support comes from. And your organization should have a system for tracking support. So there are a lot of different options when it comes to fundraising software and tools, but I've always found that an Excel spreadsheet works just fine. But actually, since we're on that right now, if anyone's using currently any grants management or donor tracking software that you like, or even that you don't like, can you put that in the chat just so everyone can sort of see what you're using and what other people are using and whether they like it or not? So go ahead and do that while we continue. Obviously, you should know who your largest funders are. So for some organizations, that might be governance support. But as we saw from that pie chart last week, for some, it might be individual donors. And then where could you strengthen that funding donor base? Current funders have the greatest potential for growth because they already know your organization, they're already invested in it, they know your work. So think about not only how to maintain the current level of funding, but how to grow these relationships. How will you steward those relationships? How will you pave the way for increased funding? So this is where your plan will come in. You'll have a path for each of these donors for stewarding each one. And we'll have an example coming up. We actually have an example of a sample development plan that you could use as a basis for yours if you didn't have one. So now I'm going to hand it over to Krista to talk you through creating an action plan.
Great, thanks, Laura. The chat, we've got two folks that use Excel, and Priscilla uses Salesforce for their CRM.
Oh, great. Excellent.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, folks. There's so many great ones out there. I worked at a very small organization, and we used, now I'm forgetting what it's called. I just had it, and it was a free one, and now I'm blanking. I think it was Nonprofit Online, but I can't remember now.
Oh, well, somebody said Donor Perfect, but I know that's not free.
No,
but
that one is not free.
Yeah, and of course there's Razor's Edge, but that's for larger, I would say, well-resourced organizations. I've actually never been able to get that. I've always worked for smaller, mid-sized.
Small, me too. Me too. And Excel does wonderful things. It's just, there's something about like a Salesforce or CRM that tracks the relationship piece that Excel is a little harder to keep up with. Including, you know, every time you send an email to a funder or a donor, Salesforce can track that into the story of the communications, which is so important when you were talking about stewarding.
Yeah, you can actually use Salesforce almost as a fundraising plan.
Right. I see some more stuff coming in, so continue to keep the chat going, folks, the conversation going in chat. You can also privately chat with each other as you're developing relationships, or maybe you want to share some tips with each other, which is such an important part of just coming to these programs that San Manuel puts on, is getting to know each other and hearing from each other. So we're going to keep it engaging as much as we can today, recognizing that we're all pulled in many different directions. So thank you, Laura, for doing a recap. Step number 4 is to create the action plan. So before we kind of dive into what the strategies are and we give you some samples, we didn't have any quick insights or questions, but I just wanted to reiterate that hopefully, if you were here last week, you had a chance to do the homework, which was really to dive into better understanding your assets. Okay, that was, we did a little bit of it together, but it's much easier. This is why we do sometimes a 2-parter, to give you an opportunity to go back and look at all of your historical numbers, look at your, how things are going today, talk to other folks about what other strengths you might have, look at your list of grants, really dive in a little deeper, because of course you don't know at the top of your head. So that assessing piece is really important. And if you haven't done that, I just wanted to reiterate right now that it's going to be really important when you start putting together what we're talking about right now, are your strategies. So it's really important, as we talked about last week, to set a goal for each revenue stream or strategy. And Laura just recapped that beautifully. So you have to know what your revenue streams and different revenue categories are in your organization to be able to set those goals, obviously. And then that also helps you, back to the SWOT, understanding where your opportunities are. Someone said it in the chat, we'd like to, develop more individual donor programs. Well, that's an opportunity too. So you might actually build a strategy for something that you don't currently have in the spirit of diversification. You want to think through all of the details for this action plan. You want to think through the who, the when, the where, the what, the how, because that's really going to make your action plan actionable, right? Again, we can all say, we want $1 million, go get it. But that's not necessarily the easiest plan to execute. It feels very much overwhelming. A lot of our work feels overwhelming. So we really want to get the details. And then any chart, like Laura said, you can use Excel. I've always used Excel. Back in the days, I used Word, and it was more of like a Word document. Again, Salesforce can be your plan. There's so many different plans, but you really want to chart it out. You want to have a timetable attached to every part of your action plan, some narrative, really outlining the details, and also the who's responsible. It's not always you, the development director, or you, the development assistant, or you, the grant writer. There's a lot of people that need to be a part of executing this plan, which in my opinion, Laura, this is the best part of talking about this topic, because often we get siloed in the work that we do. And it's like, you're the fundraiser, go do the plan. And it's like, this is when you get to be like, actually, I can't be successful unless parts of the board are involved, the senior leadership are involved, the programming team is involved to communicate what the impact is. This is where the fundraiser's role really becomes a facilitator, a herding cats expert, a master communicator at internal politics, whatever you want, a chief, it could be chief philanthropy officer, even that's not your title, because you're developing essentially a culture of philanthropy through writing a plan, right? So you don't want to just assign someone, but it's really important to get everyone involved, or at least the folks that are involved in making sure you can really execute on that. Okay, I'm going to show you a sample. So give me 1 second while I switch my screen over here. And then we're going to have you do an activity. We're going to provide you, this is a little more, we saw last week that there was some challenges accessing some of the handouts. So we wanted to give you this Excel file. Laura, let's go ahead and drop this link in the chat. And here's my recommendation for you to access it. Copy the link instead of clicking on it directly if you're having issues getting to internet. Open a new internet window. Don't close us out, and paste the link that Laura is going to give you into the toolbar, into the address bar, and see if that gets you access to this doc, okay? If for some reason it doesn't, no worries. We're going to make sure that we email you all of this stuff. Heidi's going to make sure that you get this emailed to you, okay? Thank you, Laura, for sharing that. So another tool here to help you assess your strengths, you would fill all this in, but we're kind of giving you a on target, caution, needs attention matrix here to assess your current strengths. So if you didn't get a chance to do that as homework, we're giving this opportunity to you again, and you put in each revenue stream, and we just gave you a little sample here that you can fill in. But here's our sample. This looks like a lot, and I know that it's probably super small on this screen, but this is exactly the kind of detail that helps you achieve your realistic goals that Laura just talked about. So this is our example, and then we're going to have you go ahead and download this. When you find this template, go ahead and save it to your desktop and save it to a folder so that you can use this and not necessarily everyone writing on one doc. We gave you an example for new and occasional donors. Okay, so new and occasional donors are going to be those that you just got a gift from them in the last year and you don't know who they are, or you do and it's the first time they've ever given, or you've done your homework, you've assessed your strengths as Laura talked about, and you know that you have some folks that kind of give here and give there, but you don't really know and you can't really depend on them, okay? This is a plan for them. So you want to have a kind of strategy or an action plan for each type of donor like that. We went ahead and created a sample here that our goal is to raise $10,000 from new and occasional donors by June 30th. If that's not realistic to you, we know that June 30th is coming along. Find a goal that is based on your assets, okay? What you've gotten from them. This would be, you created this because you've gotten that much from folks before, or maybe a little less and you're stretching it a little. And then there's different strategies here to accomplish that. One might be build relationships with new and occasional donors that you have personal connections to, that you might know them. Get and earn the GuideStar Seals of Transparency so you can tell the impact online. And then designing a virtual fundraising campaign. We've got a time frame for each one. We've got persons responsible for who is going to help make sure that that happens, especially something like this where it's around personal connections. Really important that board is involved, not just the development staff. Measure of success is also really important. We're going to talk a little bit about how you evaluate your plan, but how do you know that it was successful? Well, for this, we have a goal of personally connecting with a number or more people, right? So if the number last year was 25, then you might want to have a goal of, personally connecting with 30 or doubling that, 50. Doubling these days, I think, is a little bit of a reach. So again, create really realistic goals and then go crush them. Better to that's always how I've been, either as a manager or, someone responsible for my goals. I'd rather them be super realistic and overachieve them. Okay. And then you've got very specific steps for each. You want to research your prospects, you want to review the list, you want to create and execute an outreach plan, and you've got everyone with a timeline that's responsible. You do not have to drill down into the detail for this, but I highly recommend it because it really helps everyone to see, again, what their role is. So again, we've got some different examples for you here. Here's another one that helps us, kind of engage and renew occasional donors, is launching a virtual fundraising campaign. And we would track that by number of views on Instagram or posts and the number of donations. You should really have its own financial goal here, but you want to do that based on kind of historical information. If you don't have any historical information and you're like, this is the first virtual fundraising campaign we've ever done, then set something very realistic based on what folks have given in the past. Okay. And Laura's going to give you some more samples on how to do that. But my first step would be look back, look at those Excel spreadsheets, go as deep as Salesforce or whatever your CRM is or spreadsheet is, go as deep as it lets you go, because you can really start seeing some patterns. And again, we've got different solicitation strategies to make sure that that virtual campaign is a success. I've got to say, with something like this, I was fundraising in the time of Ice Bucket Challenge. I'm sure that's like old news to all of you folks. It's like, oh yeah, that's not hot and cool anymore. But I'll never forget having my board and our senior leadership go, yeah, could you just go do one of those? And I'm like, that's not how it works. You have to help us, right? Like, the reason that those things went viral is because the board was involved in getting the word out. That was ALS. So the board, and a lot of the organization got those athletes and, kind of viral stars involved, and it took off. It takes work for those things to take off. I know you all know that, but sometimes I still think there's like a misperception of what a viral campaign really is. Oh, as long as it's on the internet, it's going to go viral. It takes a lot of work, and that's where assessing your strengths and understanding how much staff and volunteers are needed is really important to kind of going back and being able to, again, figure out what your goal is. So you're going to have multiple financial goals that ultimately, that's why an Excel spreadsheet is nice, roll up into your overall goal. So it feels like a lot of detail, so I'm going to stop talking. Hopefully you've all downloaded this. If not, and you're having trouble with the handout, I'm going to leave this up on the screen. We want you to just take a few minutes and think through one of your revenue streams, which is on the left. Create a goal. It's okay if it's not completely realistic and you have to go back and do some more assessing and homework after today. Or if you know what your goal is, do some workshopping with it. And think through a time frame, the person's responsible, the measure of success, how you know you're going to be successful, and some next steps, okay? You can pull up your own Excel spreadsheet right now. You can use a notepad or some Post-it notes, type some notes into your phone, whatever works best. I want you to write it down. Write some ideas down on a sample strategy for one of your revenue streams. Okay, anything I'm missing in the chat, Laura?
No, just people who can't access it. So I just mentioned, if you can't access, just use the one on the screen for now as a guide, and not to worry, because you'll get the actual handout as an attachment later on, right after this, I promise, as soon as we can get to you.
So instructions one more time, either do this activity on a new stream. Someone said they want to develop more of an individual donor base. I would highly recommend doing that. If you're trying to build a new revenue stream, think through that strategy going across something in each category. And or if you know you have a really critical revenue stream and you haven't put together a plan, that's also a really great example to use. Try to use something that's as real time as possible. It could be individuals, it could be grants, it could be San Manuel. Your money from San Manuel because you're in the middle of a grant cycle, right? And you want a little bit of a goal here and a strategy here. It could be government funding, if you get government funding. It could be a foundation or foundation money in general, and you want a strategy around it. So really, really drill down, do something that works best for you and where you are in your organization. And we're going to give you, where are we in timeline here? Yeah, we're going to give you a good, solid, quiet 15 minutes, okay, to really think through this. And we're here if you have any questions. Okay, folks, let's have a discussion. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we will get you those handouts. Apologize that it's not super easy, but no worries. We'll get you those and you can save them in your files. Feel free to put your camera on if you're feeling comfortable. I see Lisa's comment. Let's talk about it. What came up? What did you, if you'd like to share your strategy at a high level, like who your revenue stream was and what your goals were. Share your experience in this, ask any questions. Let's have a large group discussion. Who would like to go first?
This is LaDonna. This was a great exercise, and what I noticed was the people that are responsible for these things happening are customarily the same ones. And with our organization being all volunteers, and no, we don't pay for any services or whatever, there's a concern about getting that expanded to the rest of the club, to the rest of the membership. And so it really helped with generating some thoughts behind that. And maybe sometimes the fundraising aspect is overwhelming, or some of them don't have the experience to do grant writing. And so they feel that, you know, they're not part of. So that's where I was having a struggle. It was like the same names were coming up in each one of the categories.
Thank you so much for sharing, LaDonna, and being the first one. We love this part because we can tailor kind of the rest of the workshop to meet your needs and answer some of your more urgent questions. And I would say, I'm glad you identified that as a challenge. And also, I don't think you're alone. As you saw in our sample, obviously, if you have staff, a development staff or a fundraising staff should be a common person responsible through many of these categories. But when we're talking about all volunteer, that presents much different challenges. So I'm being empathetic for you. And also, this is a deeper level of SWOT. That's why we like to start with SWOT, because now you can kind of go back and go, maybe this will help us recruiting new volunteers too, and seeing what we need to meet some of our goals.
And possibly asking volunteers who are not really interested in helping, maybe why they're still volunteering. It could be something came up, they suddenly got busy, they've picked up something else along the way. I mean, there's no shame in saying we're really looking for active volunteers. And so, you know, it might be time. You seem to be overly, not you seem to be, but it's okay to let people off the hook and get new volunteers.
Yep. And Laura knows, because Laura is one of the most active volunteers in her organization that I know. And you don't want to fire volunteers. That's like too extreme. But there's a middle ground of being able to say, this is what the organization needs. That in order to hire staff, we're going to need to do some sort of readiness work, even to get to the point where we can hire staff to do this. And, you know, if you're not able to kind of fulfill these responsibilities, then we're going to have to continue to find others. Because
and don't forget that they might not have time to volunteer anymore, but that doesn't mean they couldn't make a contribution. They do love your organization. They've been a volunteer. So that's a great conversion there. Add them to your fundraising plan with a little stewardship. Who knows, they might become a major donor.
Yep. Love it, Laura. Thank you so much for sharing, LaDonna. Would anyone else like to share your experience or some things that might have emerged in this activity?
Was it harder than you thought it would be? Was it easier than you thought? I'd love to know your impression. Amy, you're sort of so-so.
Well, I'm going to read Lisa's comment in the chat. Lisa, if you don't mind. Oh no, actually, Lisa, you sent it to me privately. Never mind. I won't read it out loud. But if you'd like to share a version of that, I'm sure everyone could relate or take something away from. Oh, okay, Lisa, take something away from what you were saying. You're basically saying that this is a new project and you're excited to start it, Lisa said. But you're shifting from another career after 18 years in law enforcement. So you thought this would be a fun and relaxing job, and boy, have you learned. And the reason I wanted to laugh is because Laura and I can relate. We completely get it. And it is hard. It is a brand new sector to learn, and it has its nuances. And at the end of the day, we can't do our work unless it's funded, right? That's how it works. So the passionate side of our work and helping others drives us, but we need to be able to fund ourselves, fund the work, fund the impact. And there's multiple ways to do that, but like everyone, I believe everyone that gets involved in nonprofit work should have some understanding and baseline of fundraising skills, because that is what it takes to do it. And you can be so much more supportive to the organization, even if you're not, like Laura said, able to actually give the time to do the fundraising. I know because of my career how important a donation means to an organization. So that's another way that you can really support and help out too if you don't have the time. So if you'd like to unmute and share a little more from your side, Lisa, feel free. I see some comments coming in as well.
Yeah, Susan said, we've been thinking of an individual donor campaign, but helpful to carve out time to develop next steps. Yeah, that's exactly what it's going to take.
Yep. And I see Amanda's comment that it was hard. It is hard. We're not expecting that you're going to finalize it today, but Laura and I, in prepping for this workshop, were remembering when we were at different organizations that didn't have plans, or that had a plan, but it wasn't drilling down the details of action steps like this plan that we would recommend. It felt way more stressful to work at those organizations. So I'm also empathetic for you in knowing that it takes a little bit of time to like steer an organization that way. On a career development level, I learned that while I create really great development plans, I also wanted to have an experience of working at different organizations throughout my career, because I wanted to see what it actually would look like if I wasn't always the starter of the culture of philanthropy as well. So you're sitting here talking part of what I did in my career journey as I joined a consulting firm and I helped organizations create development plans. We would do a feasibility study to assess assets, which is nice when you have a third party, because often you don't get a chance to really dive that deep when you don't have someone on the outside. And then we would write actually a 3 to 5 year development plan. So we're talking about 1 year here, but we would build out and say, this is what you can achieve over the next 5 years with these strategies. So if there's something we can do, and then I'm going to move on to the next steps, but if there's something we can do while you have Laura and I here to say, what do we do next? Right? This was hard, or I don't have all the information, or I don't have buy-in from other folks. If there's something we can do while we're here today before we leave in the next 40 minutes, 50 minutes, that we can help you with that next step, that's why we're here. Okay.
Great.
And anything in the chat?
Let's see, a couple other points. It's been an interesting experience fundraising in different geographic communities in my career. Yep. Mm-hmm. We're creating a capital campaign, and this was very helpful in thinking about how we can use this exercise and make sure and get everyone involved in this.
Great, Curtis. Yeah. If you haven't done the feasibility study, I'm actually volunteering at an organization in my community on a capital campaign feasibility study right now. So if you haven't done that piece, it's such an important part, because it's not a solicitation, but it's a deeper way to assess what's out there, because capital is, you've got to raise money to do your regular operation every year. And now capital means you're going to have to go ask for more somewhere else or from the same people. Mm-hmm. So you're like getting ready to be like, thanks for your regular $10,000 donation. Can you give $1 million? You know? And it's there.
10,000 next year and the year after.
Right. And please don't stop giving that because we need that for that, right? So it's needed. And obviously people get excited about capital campaigns, but that feasibility study is a deeper way, or a deeper SWOT, or a deeper analysis, is a really important way of knowing if you can be successful in raising these dollars that you need, right? Really important part of the exercise. If there's one thing that I can leave with you with around, for the example of starting an individual donor campaign, is really going back to step one and assessing what you have. Because anytime I would make recommendations, or I make recommendations for organizations, it's out of deep understanding for the history of what has been given, including the people and the funders, not just the numbers, but who and what they gave. And then analysis on like running the numbers and going, based on the history and our assets, including your board and relationships, this is what we think we can be successful in doing. It's still a guess, but it's way more calculated and way more successful. And actually, that's what people want to fund, right, Laura? They don't want to fund just an idea. They really want to fund a plan. They really want to fund, they've got this plan figured out. There's people on board that are already going to say yes, or already have. And so it's like the chicken and egg. Like, you've got to have that plan and that kind of base before more people are going to give you more. So if you're wanting to do an individual donor campaign, assess who those individuals might be. And that will typically lead you to the action steps. Okay. Shall we keep going, Laura?
Yeah. And I think I am next.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
Okay.
Let me stop sharing. Keep those questions coming in and comments into the chat, because we'll have another break after we kind of look at next steps to, again, tailor some answers to help you with your next step, okay?
Okay, now we're talking about implementing your plan. So obviously next you'll want to implement your action plan. That's the next step. We're going to be, what that means is checking in regularly with staff, first of all. Sometimes presenting at meetings, whether it's a staff meeting or a board meeting. The idea is to make sure that you're all on the same page and that everyone has all the information that they need. So top staff and board know exactly where you are on the fundraising track, because that will help them. And also, if you're for some reason short on your fundraising target at some point in your plan during the year, it's not just you out on a limb. You'll have the backing of the rest of the organization with any luck. Everyone should be interested in your success. And to do that, you really have to involve everyone. So when you do your fundraising plan, it's not something that you create and then leave on a shelf and never look at it again. It's a living document. So you revise it either whether it's monthly after meetings or weekly after staff meetings, whatever your organization, whatever you think is best. But you have to revise it, adjust it along the way, see what's working, see what's not working. So I'm going to ask you all a question, which you can put the answer in chat. Who do you meet with regularly? Who's in that meeting? How often do you meet? Are you including, these are a lot of questions, you don't have to answer them all. But are you including a finance person who's giving you who's reconciling the numbers and letting you know where you are along your fundraising plan? Or is it program staff you're meeting with? So who are you including and what is their role? I guess that's the best question. Who are you meeting with and what is their role? And obviously we want to know, do you have a process for donor reporting for your development plan and your annual report? So that's what we're getting to. But I want to know who you're meeting and how often. Keep it simple. Hopefully you're not just meeting with yourself.
Well, but it happens, right, Laura?
It sure does. It sure, especially right now, I would imagine. You know,
This is-
hopefully people are meeting over Zoom at this point, but
Yep.
a year ago it was like, oh no, what do I do now?
Well, I'll never forget. I had a role when I was fundraising, and all of a sudden I'm like, when are we gonna like check in on this? And then I was like, oh my God, that's my job. Right. So it also is like, I think somebody said, you know, it's a lot of work planning, and then it's even more work kind of doing the work and then going back to the plan. Like you said, it's not on a shelf, Laura.
Yeah.
But sometimes we get so busy implementing that it is hard to include others because it does take more time.
Yeah, and of course, you know, the development plan, you'll get input from everyone, but at the end of the day, it's sort of your plan to help guide and administer with other people. So it is sort of your document to adjust and fill in. A lot of times it might not be, it might be the program staff, it might be someone else. But the point is, I've been in situations where I sort of go down the rabbit hole of planning it all out. And then I think to myself, I really should go over this with somebody because is this goal even possible? So I need a lot more information, of course. I need the finances. How much did they give last year? Over the last 10 years, if it's a major donor, you know, are they friends with a board member? So getting all that information put in your plan. And
we're not getting any, sorry, Laura, we're not getting any quick feedback. One just came in, but maybe you could give us an example on how you would, or who you would meet with and what their role might be.
yeah, so for my,
actually, Amanda just sent one in too, but sorry.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, no, you should read those first and then I'll say later.
Amanda said the CEO to set vision and priorities.
Mhm.
Yes. CFO to determine the budget. CPO, I think that's program officer, to provide program goals and progress towards goals. And then we meet monthly as a group as well as periodically throughout the month. Thank you so much for sharing, Amanda. That's a perfect example.
Yes, that is perfect. And did you say there was another example in the chat? Oh, that was it.
No, that's the one. And
Yeah.
I was thinking of an example around like, how do you engage a committee if you have like a volunteer development committee from the board too? Should that be a regular part of
Yes.
how you implement your plan?
So actually I could talk about that first. I'm the president of a board of a nonprofit theater in San Francisco. And we have monthly board meetings, and then in between the board meetings, that's when the executive committees meet. So there's a development committee. It has a development committee chair, basically the person who sets all the meetings and makes sure that we're on goal. So for that meeting, the person that comes is usually either the executive director or development director, depending on who's involved at that moment. Right now, we don't have a development director, so it's the executive director. But the point is to meet regularly, and the reason really is to keep the board engaged and up to date on what's going on, and also to get their help. So the development committee meets once a month to talk about who they're going to engage, who might be a potential board member or major giver in the future, how the board can help staff fundraise, essentially. And then the board meets to see where we are in that process.
Thank you, Laura. And I think this relates back to the action plan that you just drafted that, should be more built out for each revenue stream. But as definitely the folks that are responsible should have a regular check-in for each item that they're responsible for. So if it's the board is helping with a virtual, fundraising campaign, like the example that we gave, that would be, I think your example is perfect on how they would be involved during a campaign in implementing the plan. And a lot of times I recommend as fundraisers, even if you don't have that direct relationship to the board, you're creating toolkits for the board. That's the easiest way to describe what it is. Part of the campaign, whatever that is that you're trying to raise money for, if the virtual campaign is the example, you're creating toolkits to get the board. I always used to do every season, I'd have here's 10 ways on how you can help and what we're doing. Share the virtual fundraising campaign, have some meetings with us, bring more prospects to the table. There's different ways that you can include different stakeholders in how to implement.
Absolutely. So, so in my organization, we're a fairly small organization. When I was on staff at this theater organization before I was on the board, I would, as development director, I would meet with our founder and our development assistant pretty much once a week. We met quite often because our funding was sort of volatile, just because it's a theater. There's a lot of, earned income versus contributed income with box office sales. It was sort of complicated. And the founder was really great at fundraising. So he actually loved coming to fundraising meetings, which was great. That was definitely a strength of ours. And then we would go through the fundraising plan and look to see where we are with everything. I would get the financial information from the bookkeeper ahead of time, so I would know where we were on the actuals. And then once a week when we would have our staff meeting, I would present to the rest of the staff where we were, what was going on. And a lot of times we would get great information from staff members, or ideas, or, oh, hey, I know that person who comes to all of our shows, maybe let's add them to the development list. So it was a great way to keep staff informed, keep them engaged. And then once a month, we would have a short, like 5 minutes where I would present to the board and let them know what was going on. And same thing there. They might have some great ideas, or they might want to know, somebody that they sent over to us, how's that going? Do I need to step in and maybe we can have lunch? So it was a great way to keep everyone engaged and make sure that they're part of the solution. So like I said before, you're not out there on a limb if some big donation doesn't come in and you fall short of your budget.
Because that's very likely this year. This is going to be a tough year, folks, if it's already started that way. So the most important part of your plan, as Laura just said, is to make sure that you have a group, including senior leadership and volunteer leadership, that you're checking in with, so that it's not the end of the year and you're like, sorry, we didn't meet our goal by like a lot.
Right.
You have time to pivot. And I would also add, I loved your example that I think it's good to keep senior leadership involved, but also don't forget everyone else in the organization. I think that happens sometimes, like, the person that's answering the phones, or, being that kind of virtual or in-person first impressions of what's going on in the organization. It also needs to know what's happening. Because if we keep it too executive, then we're not building the culture of philanthropy within the folks that might be external, that can also be spreading the word. And who knows, maybe even donating and thinking of other prospects themselves. Don't leave those folks out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's funny, when I worked for the Exploratorium Museum a while back, everything was so siloed with respect to fundraising and programs. Programs was completely separate from fundraising. And there were times as programs manager there where I actually had a great idea for somebody who could become a major donor, somebody I'd met, or I actually ended up having a neighbor who was very interested in arts and science, which is exactly the intersection that the Exploratorium looks for in a donor. And, I didn't know who to talk to. I had this great lead and I'm like, I don't even know anybody, like, who would I even go to? I did find out, and it was, well received, but I thought, well, why is it so siloed? We should all be working together. All right, yes. I think we'll move on to the next slide. Which is evaluating your plan. So how will you know if your plan is successful? How will you know what worked, what could be better? And more importantly, was the money raised worth all the time and effort you put into it? And, some people say, well, I'll just fundraise, as much as I can. I'll follow every single lead, and at some point, hopefully it'll lead to something. But you don't have unlimited time and resources during the day. So make sure you know whether something is worth your time and effort. And if it's not, cut it loose. And this is the way to lay the groundwork for next year's development plan. It's also a great opportunity to do another SWOT analysis just on your fundraising plan. What were the strengths and weaknesses? What areas are showing opportunity for growth? And I actually have an example to share with you that actually happened to me. speaking of evaluating development plans. So I had a board chair a few years ago when I was on staff at this nonprofit organization who had met someone, I believe at one of our shows, it was a theater, who was potentially a major donor and possibly even a board member. It was somebody that she had met who had come to our shows before, seemed to like them, and we found out that he was on the board and also a very major donor to another theater that we often worked with. So she thought, well, this might be somebody that, you know, might also be interested in our organization. That happens quite a bit. People aren't usually on board with only one organization. So we were able to meet this person for lunch, and we, you know, sort of kept them involved, and he seemed sort of warm to the idea. So this went on for probably the better part of a year, where we would, you know, we gave him a tour of the space. We invite him to opening night. So we did all of this sort of, you know, development stewardship that happens when you're trying to get a major donor in. So the last step was we planned to have a lunch, and this was almost a year in, and he did seem receptive. So we thought, let's have a lunch with him, and we'll see if the time is right to make an ask. Obviously, we needed to make the ask at some point, and this seemed like the right time. And then at the last minute, my board chair actually had to cancel the organization. Not the organization. She had to cancel the meeting because her organization had an emergency situation. So we canceled the lunch. We said we'd love to reschedule. And this person got so bent out of shape. He ended up saying he was really angry about the meeting being canceled. And he said he was not interested in meeting again. So I felt terrible. My board chair felt terrible. I thought, oh shoot, we just pissed off a potential major donor, potential board member. This is terrible. And she felt terrible. But the more we talked about it, the more we thought, you know, we might have just dodged a bullet, because here we spent the better part of a year with this person. And at the end of the day, this organization just doesn't have the resources or the time to give this person what they need in order for them to be really engaged in our theater. It's not possible. So we did find out later that the board that he was on was having difficulty with him because he did take up so much of their time and energy. So that's a perfect example of, you know, let's say he had given us a donation, given all the time that we spent, could we have used that for a better opportunity? Could we be further along with somebody else who was sort of willing to give? And, you know, when I look back now, I wonder if maybe he sort of wasn't thinking about giving, and he sort of took this as an excuse to say, oh, you canceled this meeting, that's terrible, I'm not interested. I feel like he sort of knew that he was going to say no, but I don't know, that's just my own 2 cents. So I hope that helps. It was one of those situations where you wonder if, but at the same time, we did feel like we kind of dodged a bullet.
Yeah, sometimes, yes, somebody agreed, definitely dodged a bullet. Sometimes when funding opportunities don't work out, it's meant to be in a good way. And sometimes you have to know what those are through a proper evaluation too. I wanted to give a plug, Laura. That's such a great example, because when we come back in June, Heidi, we're going to be diving into more details on how to build relationships with individual donors. And we can talk a little bit more about kind of time return and how to qualify someone so that you can, you know, be more comfortable moving to the next stage. So such a great example to kind of get us ready for that in June. Amanda was also sharing in chat around kind of the time and effort towards events too, which is very similar in terms of evaluating. Actually, I will add, don't put an event in your plan unless you've evaluated it already. This is why everything works in a circle. So don't just do an event because you did an event. Evaluate it now before you put it in the plan, and then evaluate it again.
That's good advice. Yes, I agree. There was one year where I decided house party is not worth the time and effort.
Yeah.
For the money raised, you're using all of the time and resources of your board who's hosting, and at the end of the day, you raise a couple $1,000s. It's not worth it.
No.
I do have a sample development plan that I was going to show. Krista, do we have time for that, or we could just send it afterwards?
I think we should send it afterwards so that we have a little more time for discussion and Q&A.
That sounds good.
But if we have time at the end, we will add it there because it goes into more detail. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect. And it's self-explanatory. When we send it, people will see basically it's a place to put in all of your where your donations go, whether it's board or individuals or foundations, and then your budget, and then each tab will have a place where you can put in specific information about donors or board members, and then the totals will add up so that they will show up in the summary. So it's kind of a good basic development plan that you can actually use as a template.
So amazing. Laura kind of put together a template for you all today. We'll make sure that even if it's just a quick screen share at the end. Before we move on, thank you, Laura, for that. I want to give a couple of quick moments for you to write some more notes, because I'm like all about notes, because you're gonna leave this, you're gonna go to another meeting and rush back to your other thing that you were doing before this. Write down some notes. They're connected. How to implement your plan and how to evaluate. Who should you be meeting with, or some ideas, like Laura said, on implementation. And also write down some notes on some ideas for additional evaluation for your plan. If you already have one, or if you're getting ready to launch one, what are ways that you can build evaluation into your plan now? For those that have notes, please, I really urge you to write this, either type or write, so that it's captured. We'll give you a few quiet minutes to take some notes.
And when you're evaluating, is the money that you raised worth the time and effort? That's one of the questions we're asking here.
Okay, am I unmuted?
Mm-hmm.
Who would like to share what you wrote down? I'd love to know. These are essentially action steps. We're going meta. You've got action steps for your action plan. That's how I take lists, notes, right? Like, do this so you can do that. Who would like to write down something that you wrote today, whether it was about evaluating or implementing or even planning? Share your notes. We want to know. You can use the chat too, but this is an opportunity for you to learn from each other. Like we've got examples, which I think are, I mean, I could keep going, but I think it's more valuable for you to hear examples from each other.
Hi, this is Susie. Oh, sorry.
Hi.
Actually, this is Susie. So I think the question that you asked regarding, is it worth your time and effort? So this is just a lesson learned for us. Is sometimes I think when you first start out, you're looking at funding and, any funding is good funding. But the truth about that, as you learn later, that not necessarily is the case. And one of those lessons learned early on was around a very cumbersome administrative grant, right? And it was, and I won't say who the funder was, but it was extraordinarily cumbersome in terms of administrative oversight. And at the end of it, was it worth the time and effort? Absolutely not. It was probably cost us more than what we received. And it became the threshold and a benchmark for us as we move forward, is that we really looked, and we couldn't capture true cost of what it was to do a program for for a funder or for a project, then we would just pass. And I know it's hard for smaller organizations sometimes, and we were small at the time, thinking, okay, how do you turn away? This is a large sum of money, but you really do need to turn away money sometimes when it's not a good fit for your organization, or you're not getting what it really takes for you to do a program. So that's what first came to mind about that.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing, Susan.
And especially if it's an organization that doesn't fund any overhead, because essentially they're not paying for you to do your reporting. They're paying for you to do the program, which is fine. Maybe you can find overhead funding somewhere else. But the point is they're not investing in your, in the administration of the grant that they're giving you. And that's not really fair, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think there's a shift. Someone in the chat said that they can relate, Susan, that they got a $2,000 grant with reporting requirements that rivaled government grants, which if you don't have any of those, they're a lot.
Yes.
We have several with the city of San Francisco right now, which we're grateful for, but we have to build in, even us, we have to build in our costs for what it takes to make sure that we, are able to share all of that information back. Someone else is having a similar experience for 2,500. Yeah. How far is 2,500 or 2,000, really going to go? And I feel hopeful. And one of the things that I'm feeling hopeful for, Laura, today is that the sector is shifting. It's not moving quickly though. So there are more conversations, especially here at Candid. We've got groups that are having conversations with foundations on a regular basis saying, how can we make this easier, foundations, for you, but mostly for the organization, so that the money can really go towards the maximum impact, right? So for example, one of the things that we're working on, I think I shared last week, is using GuideStar as a tool for funders, so that if you spend the time in updating GuideStar on all this important information that funders might ask you, that hopefully, funders will just use that as a common place, so you don't have to keep repeating it. Even the time copying and pasting some things can be time that is coming away from, something else. So it's real, and you have to assess that. I guess my question back to you, Susan, is how are you documenting that lesson learned so that others in the future have learned that? Because I think a lot of times I see an unfortunate revolving door with fundraising professionals, because it might take another person to teach some of these lessons, and then often what happens is then they're relearning these lessons. So is there a way that you've documented this so that it's part of your organization strategy in the future?
Yeah, thank you, Krista. We actually did embed it as a threshold when we're doing an assessment as to what we're going to look at, who we're going to look at funding for, our strategy around how we're looking for funding and what projects. And also because we are actually a capacity builder in the region with other nonprofits, that's one of the stories that we share about that. And I think being a nonprofit ourselves and having to experience some of those things, those are the really, just like you guys are sharing some of those stories that you have had as, working in the nonprofit sector. It's imperative, especially I think for smaller nonprofits, that it seems to be a mistake that we see over and over and over again, because, as you say, we have no money. We'll take whatever money you're giving us. And sometimes it's just letting them know you need to pass maybe on this. This will cost you more money than you're getting, right? And it is, we like to be able to share that information whenever we can.
Thank you. So important, because it's that lesson learned. I think Candid is striving for that in their community too, by partnering with San Manuel, is like trying to tell these stories more so that you can be more strategic for you, so that we don't have to keep relearning. But it's part of the organization culture too. Okay, so I don't want to say what's right or wrong, but more back to kind of Laura's point on who are you meeting with and who's part of this discussion, considering community as an important stakeholder that we don't want to leave out, like who you're serving, for example. They don't necessarily have to know about your development plan details, but how are you including them, so that we're kind of back to the stakeholder.
So
Um,
Stephanie
yeah.
says, I just want to read her comment.
Please.
Of course, if money falls into our hands, we're so grateful. Yes, yes to that. Typically, though, I like our donors to be vested in our cause. We do sensitivity training for their employees. I like for what we do to become part of what they do. That kind of investment is exciting and it keeps our donors engaged for years to come. Absolutely, donor engagement.
Love it. Wonderful discussion, folks. Thanks so much. Let's recap here. Where's my projection screen? So we covered our 6 steps. Identify assets, really important. These also are a circle. They can go linear, but again, if you get to a step and you're like, I don't know, go back to identify your assets. Go back to doing your evaluation and your assessment. Develop a case statement, really important to put on your to-do list or to update it with COVID realities. Set your goals. And today we really drilled into creating an action plan and how important that is, implementing your plan and who should be involved, and finally evaluating your plan and setting it up for success moving forward and or as you go through the process. So some key takeaways: really know where you're starting from. That goes back to the assessing, and where you need to go, right? We can all say we need millions and millions of dollars, but the more specific you can get with a kind of impact and change you want to make, you can start really understanding what that's going to cost. And Laura, my perfect example for that is a theater. Like the artistic side, I used to work at a theater here and did some consulting work in San Diego. The artistic side can say, we want to do all these shows, go raise money for it. Right? But then it needs to be a conversation to say, we want to do all these shows, this is what it costs. And then the fundraising team to say, we assessed what we can do, and here's what we came up with. And then there's a meeting of the minds to say, okay, based on both of those plans, that's where we want to go. And hopefully you're successful at it. Again, you throw a pandemic in the middle of it, it gets a little wild. Diversify your funding streams. So important. This is the most uncertain year I've ever worked. This is my 18th year officially as like a working adult with a paycheck. I did a lot of volunteering before my career started, but I think this is the most uncertain year I've ever seen. We've had economic challenges before. We've had, national and global unrest, but this is as uncertain as it gets for the field. And I hope over the next few months, we're going to be able to be providing you more reports on how last year went to make informed decisions, but diversification is going to be your friend this year, for sure. Set realistic goals. Laura, I think you really nailed this earlier. This is so important. It's critical that you make sure that it's appropriate, applicable, kind of in the moment, and most importantly, actually achievable. It's good to be like the hope ambassador. People are like, you're so positive about it. I'm like, well, because I have a really good plan. I was really confident and positive about my fundraising work because I had a great plan that said, if you do this, it's going to be successful. But it was based on realistic goals because I love overachieving. You can tell by my personality, but I love being like, you know what? I said I was going to do this and I did this, bam. So it's so much, especially in this challenging year. Okay. It's so much better to achieve and set very realistic goals to start. And then your staff and your board get more excited about it too. Like, oh, we can do this. And critical, evaluate your plan and revise as needed. If you already have a plan in place, have a revision check-in meeting just because they don't hurt. They do take time, but more check-in. If there was some kind of light bulbs that might have gone off today, more check-in time will never be a bad thing for your organization. Most importantly, it keeps you flexible, nimble during a challenging year, and has the whole team creating solutions for you if some reason something doesn't make the mark or hit the mark. Okay, this is the year for innovation and full team on board, 100%, 120% on board. So we can take a little more questions, but I wanted to make sure that we also share this slide with you before we hand it back over to Heidi. We are doing a free workshop at the end of the month with some CPAs up in the Bay Area that I still think is going to be super relevant to you folks. It's completely free and it's for small organizations that can't hire a CPA. or any accounting to help with your tax filing this year. So if you are interested, please sign up today. It's totally free. We're going to be there, and spread the word. And we'll also get you the details in the follow-up email as well. Thank you so much. Laura, let's give them the link to our newsletter. If you want to see some cool upcoming stuff in our region, please follow the West newsletter. And Heidi, I'm handing it back over to you.
Well, thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen again. Okay. Oops. All right, so we just have a few announcements for you all before we send you on your way to really work on these plans. You want to remind you again that a recording of the presentation, the recording and presentation will be emailed out, and it's also available on our San Manuel Cares website on the resources page. But we'll go ahead and get that document out to you as soon as the webinar is done, because sometimes it can take a few days to get the recording uploaded and available to send out. Please complete our survey. We get a lot of our ideas for topics based on your responses, so very valuable to us. Please complete the survey. It will automatically come to your inbox probably in the next couple of minutes here, about 11:30, and then I'll also send the link when I send out the recording and presentation, so you'll have those two chances to take the survey. And then next month we have another webinar, COVID-19 a year later, challenges, accomplishments, and a look ahead. This will be a panel discussion with a nonprofit organization from each of our giving pillars, so that way it kind of a peer learning situation where you can see what other nonprofits are doing. And then we have Candid back again. Krista and Laura will be back in June, on June 8th and June 15th for a two-part seminar, 8 steps for cultivating relationships with donors. And then, so a reminder as well, our grant cycle is open until April 30th, 2021. So you've got a few more weeks to get your applications submitted. All right, with that, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. We hope this was useful to you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. Feel free to contact us if you have other questions.